Hey, fifth graders. I am here today reading chapter 19 of Pillage by Obert Sky. Remember in chapter 18, Beck was locked down into his room. They covered the windows, and so he began reading the book that he found in the basement to devise a plan to escape. Excerpt from section 9 of The Grim Got Not as recorded by Daniel Phillips. When the peddler returned to take the remaining stones, Bruno Pillage was gone. He had kindly scorched all his land and burned his home to the ground. The peddler cursed the Pillage family again, promising horrid deaths for every male bearing the Pillage name, and instantly for the women. Chapter 19. Barbarism begins. I had only heard the word genealogy twice in my life, maybe a few more if you count movies. Who knows what half the people are saying in movies? I had to look up the word in the dictionary. The Grim Got Not was full of genealogy, beginning with my great, very ancient, super old grandfather, Hermitage Pillage. Apparently, he was a poor boy, but happy and could really grow things. His son, Edward Pillage, was born in 1790, and he was cruel and really messed up the family. I could see through the small cracks in the boards that the sun was finally down. I still was locked in the room, but I felt smarter for having read a little in my book. Thomas brought me dinner. He stood inside the room watching me eat as if I might have been able to use the dry bread and mushy potatoes to make a break for it. After I finished my meal, he let me use the bathroom and wash up. While in the bathroom, I searched for a way out, but there was no windows and none of the drains were large enough for me to slip through. I came out of the bathroom no freer than I had been before I went in. Thomas was in the hall blocking the way. I knew if I were to pile drive him, I could probably take him out and get away, but despite all the bad things I had done in my life, I just didn't have it in me to knock over an old man. Not yet, at least. I crossed the hall. As I crossed the hall, I tried to reason with him. Maybe I can help, I suggested. How do you know I don't want exactly what you do? We can't take that chance, Thomas insisted. In time, there may be a spot for you. I walked into my room and Thomas locked the door behind me. I had never really been a prisoner before. It felt awful, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. My goal was clear. Get out. I liked having a goal to focus my mental energy on. It was hard to think about my mother dying or dragons or worrying over unknown noises when I was so centered on getting free. I spent a few minutes trying to pull up any of the floorboards. I finally got one loose, but I could see the surface beneath it was too hard to work through. I went through my backpack looking for anything I could use and found a screwdriver at the bottom of the pack. I walked to the door and shoved the flathead screwdriver into the lock as far as possible. I twisted it in the metal dragon's mouth, but nothing broke inside. Frustrated, I leaned against the door with my eyes closed, cursing. After using a few words that my mother wouldn't have been proud of, I opened my eyes and noticed the large brass hinges on the door. I grabbed the top one, wiggling to see how solid it was. It didn't wiggle at all. The top of the hinge pin was a small metal gargoyle head, and on the bottom of the hinge pin were tiny claws. All three hinges on the door were identical. I jammed the screwdriver into the hinge, trying to pop it open. Nothing. I held the screwdriver by the flat head and beat the hinge with the handle. Not only did it not do anything, but the noise was so loud I was certain Thomas would come up to investigate. I waited a few minutes, listening for his footsteps in the hallway. Silence. I slipped the screwdriver tip against the door, with the length of the metal resting at the bottom of the hinge pin, right behind the tiny claws. With the leverage that gave me, I pulled the angled screwdriver toward me. A satisfying snap rang through the room as the tiny claws went flying into the far wall. I took the screwdriver and placed the tip under the bottom of the broken pin. With a little effort, I was able to push the pin up and out. The top hinge was open. The middle hinge was more stubborn, and the bottom one was the easiest of all. I slid all 3 broken rods back into place and sat on my bed, waiting for the house to be quiet and still. I needed to wait at least until Thomas and Wayne and Miley were sleeping. I picked up the Grimgot Knot and read some more. When I finally set the book down, I had no idea what time it was. I felt like I had been waiting and reading for days. I couldn't wait any longer, so I pulled the pins out and tried to pull the door out of the jamb. Apparently, back when the manor was built, they made doors out of lead. It was so heavy that I was afraid it was going to fall and topple me. I stuck the screwdriver into the jamb next to the middle hinge and wedged that side of the door out. The door hesitantly slid off its hinges and made a soft but solid thunk as it came to rest on the floor. I worked my fingers around the hinge side and pulled inward. The door snapped out of the lock and started to lean toward me. I braced my arms, but it was too heavy. The door came tumbling down. I fell to the ground at the foot of my bed. The top of the door caught the edge of the bed, preventing me from being smashed. I crawled out from under the door and looked into the dark hall. The hall was empty. I was honestly surprised not to see Thomas and Wayne standing there looking disappointed. I threw the screwdriver into my backpack as well as most of my other personal items. I pulled the Grimgot Knot out from under my mattress and flung my backpack over my shoulder. I was not planning on coming back. Leaving my suitcase and most of my clothes behind, I took off down the hall. I had been so nervous about getting out of my room that I had not noticed how windy it was inside the manor. The hall was flowing like a stream with thick currents of wind. I made my way down to the first floor and snuck into the kitchen. The clock on the wall said 12:29. I had been more patient than I thought. I grabbed the phone and dialed Mr. Claude's home number. It rang 7 times before a very tired-sounding voice came on the line. "Hello?" "Mr. Claude," I said. "Who is this?" he asked groggily. "It's Beck Phillips." There was a long pause. "Beck, do you know what time it is?" I resisted the urge to be sarcastic. "I'm in trouble," I said. "They've locked me up." "What?" he said, flustered. "You must be mistaken." I couldn't resist this time. "Right," I said. "They're probably just playing a really competitive game of hide and seek." "I don't know what to say," Mr. Claude admitted, his voice waking up. "They sent for you." "Sent for me?" I whispered. "Didn't you find them?" "Well, no. We were searching for any relatives of yours, and they called. It seemed fateful," he said. "You don't understand," I argued, fighting to keep my voice down. "I'm in trouble." "I'm sure it's nothing like that," Mr. Claude said. "They probably just have a different way of raising children than your mother did. I don't know how adults live with themselves." "This isn't about raising children," I said. My conversation was cut short, thanks to Thomas pressing the cradle on the phone. He was wearing old-fashioned pajamas and looked unhappy about losing any sleep. I threw the receiver at him and darted out of the kitchen. The door leading outside was unlocked, and I burst through it, stepping down onto the drive. Thomas was right behind me. "Scott!" Thomas yelled. I ran toward the front of the manor. I threaded through the statues and leapt onto the front lawn. Someone fired a shotgun into the air. My heart considered giving out, but I knew that if I fell down now, they would catch me. I headed into the trees lining the side of the lawn and ran through the forest. A second gunshot fired, sounding muffled and far away. I didn't let that slow me down, however. I ran through the forest until I couldn't breathe. I stopped to catch my breath before running again. 6 breathing stops later, I was at the edge of a wide river and too tired to go on. I crawled underneath the thick branches of pine tree and listened for the dogs. There were a number of things wrong with my life, as well as a long list of things I didn't enjoy about King's Plot, but at that moment, what I missed was sleep. I used to spend entire days sleeping while my mom was in one of her moods. Now I hardly got in a few hours a night. I couldn't hear the dogs. It was cold, but the extra clothes I had put on and the sweat I had worked up running were keeping me warm for the moment. I wanted to find Kate's or Milo's home, but I had no idea which direction to head. Mr. Claude had been useless, and I had nowhere to go. I leaned against the base of the trunk and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. When it grew light enough to see, I crawled out of my hiding spot. The woods were alive with animals, scurrying up trees and running across clearings. I saw 4 elk drinking from the river only a couple 100 feet away from me. I looked east where the sun was rising and then began to walk. After about a half an hour, I recognized how the mountain sloped into a valley and knew which direction the manor was. I skirted the side of the hill until I could see the far wall of the conservatory. I stopped and turned around slowly, watching the area for any signs of life. It was hard to believe there were dragons in the conservatory. It was so quiet. The mist above the walls held the sound in nicely. I hiked behind the conservatory to the bricked-in archway. There was no ivy climbing the walls. We had been using the shack entrance lately, and I had not left ivy on the walls for fear of being caught. I looked at the ivy beneath the archway and it reluctantly began to grow. I thought about it even harder, but it still moved slowly. Halfway up the wall, it stopped. "Come on," I whispered. "Grow!" The ivy seemed bothered by me. It wouldn't move at first, but eventually it pushed up into the mist. I was so focused on the ivy that I hadn't noticed the spot of red sneaking across the garden and coming closer. At first I thought it might be a deer or an animal, but as soon as I could focus on it, I could tell it was Kate. Milo was trailing behind her. I didn't know how to feel. I found a spot where I knew they would pass by. As they stepped close, I called their names and waved them over. Kate hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. It was almost worth being locked up for a reception like that. Kate and Milo carried small bundles of bound weeds with rocks anchored to them. They were on their way to feed the dragons. "We've been throwing things over the wall every few hours," Kate said. "It's almost impossible to heave them that high. It takes forever." "We're exhausted," Milo added needlessly. "Thomas, Miley, and Wayne know about the dragons," I said. "They brought me here specifically to grow them." Milo looked confused. "Why'd they not let you back into the gardens then?" Kate asked. "Apparently they heard I was more likely to do something if I was told not to." "You must be so proud," Kate said. "You've created a nice reputation." "So what now?" Milo asked. We sat under the boughs of a huge tree, and I took a few minutes to fill them in. Okay, my friends, that is the end of chapter 19. I will see you tomorrow for chapter 20.